We turned 300 hours of sales transcripts and other scattered context into a living company brain for Nickel. Nickel is a B2B payments platform for trade and construction firms. We first pointed that system, the context operating system, let me use the term I created for it. We first pointed that system at SEO and product marketing. It 5x'd their content production speed while maintaining quality. From there, we looked for other use cases and problem sets to point it at. We pointed it at everything from drastically improving the quality of their their support chatbot, all the way to using it to onboard new hires faster. Now, the whole team uses it to ship, test, and learn faster, synthesizing sales intelligence directly from the system itself. Their head of growth allegedly doesn't open HubSpot at all anymore. We'll see if that's actually true. But that head of growth is Ivan LaBianca. Him and I have had a ton of fun working together. In this video, we're going to show you what we built, why we decided to build it, and best practices around using AI in AI context systems in go-to-market. Thank you so much to Ray, Claudio, and the rest of the team at Nickel. I had a ton of fun working together. And without further ado, let's get into it. Very quickly, another thing I wanted to call out, the video quality is not great. There's a technical issue I didn't realize until we finished recording. So I try to cut it up as best I could. There's two things I suggest you do. Well, number one, I'm investing a lot more in my setup. That will not happen again. And two ways to kind of get a better experience. One, it's cut so you can watch it mostly as a podcast. So if you want to listen to audio, you won't see any of the jittering. And number two, if you are going to watch the video, there is a written case study linked below that you can have as an accompaniment. So there's actual timestamps for each section that kind of give you more of the technical breakdown and more context. I feel like I say that word every single day now, literally all the time. Anyways, it's useful because I was able to actually get the core architecture into that written doc, sanitizing out all of the specific Nickel client names and stuff we couldn't show. So that should be another way to kind of improve your overall watching experience, and I hope it's valuable to you. Bye. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. We're going to talk about the context operating system we built out for Nickel. So if you tell me a little bit about what Nickel is, your role there, and your background, we could get right into it.
Yeah, I'm Ivan LaBianca, head of growth at Nickel. I've been working with Nickel now for about 1.5 years. I met Ray and Claudio and Najir and felt super lucky because they basically, it seemed like they had product market fit, and was able to come on and really help grow things on the go-to-market side. I think we met last. I think I met on Zoom on a Zoom call because I had been I'd been at a Clay event, and Jordan Crawford was there and was presenting something where you had built some integration, I think, with shovels.io.
Yep. Yeah.
It was super impressive.
Yeah, that's funny. I forget that's how we met. Yeah, that was I remember doing that project with Jordan. That was fun. I forgot that's how you and I had connected though. That was fun.
Yeah, and I didn't even fully understand at the time he was talking about you connected an MCP server, and I was aware. I knew MCP servers were a way for, at the time, I think, tool calls and all this was relatively new. But you were at the time making custom MCP servers, I think, under your digital leverage.
That was a different iteration there. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about, I guess, one, when we started to work together, what were you hoping to what value we're hoping to get out of the system, what outcomes that might be useful context for everyone listening, watching.
Yeah, well, Nickel is focused on, we have a really broad market that can use Nickel, but the people that benefit the most are generally businesses that have relatively small headcount. It's either the owner or a small team that's doing the accounts payable and accounts receivable. And we found a really, really good fit with industrial small businesses, tradespeople, contractors, and their suppliers. And so when I saw this shovels, the cold email campaign that Jordan was running, that was initially what I was thinking is like you would come in and help us do something with Clay, and I was looking for support there. We were trying to grow that out, and I'd done things with Clay, but wanted some extra support. And then you were the one that introduced me and started telling me about, you've been working on this context architecture. I didn't really understand what it was, but basically could tell that you were really smart and capable and going to do cool stuff with AI, and was like, let's build some stuff.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge game changer for us. Yeah, we can dive in
Dig
and I can
into
show
it.
you some of the specifics. I think the first use case we were trying to solve for was I wanted to accelerate content writing.
Hmm.
And um, one of the things I was looking at an agency that I trust to generate really high quality content, but their price per article. I knew that personally I was able to write articles about 3 times faster than I used to and still hit the
Yeah.
quality bar that I wanted using Claude. But what we ended up doing was there were two problems or two problems I wanted to be able to solve that we solved remarkably fast. The first was to be able to identify high value keywords. And
Okay.
so when you use a keyword research tool, it has all the data on search volume, difficulty, but it doesn't, the big missing piece is how valuable is this term actually to your audience? How likely is it to convert for
Got it.
you specifically?
So connecting
And
those dots, right?
exactly. And so
Hmm.
with the system we have in Casper, as we ended up naming it internally.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the internal name for their context OS. I think Ray named it that, right?
Yeah, I think he asked it to name itself, and I don't even remember what the acronym was, but the name turned out good, so that's
That's
what
funny.
counts.
Yeah.
Something with revenue and product acceleration, I believe, but
I bet the
uh,
C's a context, I think.
yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, cool.
But I had been using Clay actually to do essentially to process keywords that I'd pulled
Okay.
and was doing this kind of a scoring in Clay,
Yep.
which is kind of a side use case, not their traditional use case.
Yeah.
And you were able to build something that build a skill internally that we were able to load and run. This was, I think, before Claude really had the ability to process spreadsheets. Claude
Oh
code at the
yeah,
time, didn't it?
before they released that Excel that Excel extension. But yeah, one
Yeah,
of the skills I created was a command line that it could go run tabular data like that.
yeah.
So using that to, I think you said like dramatically accelerated your content speed while keeping that tempo, right? And I think a large portion was the human in the loop still.
Yeah, well, for a smaller, we don't have a huge amount of domain authority, and
Hmm.
so identifying those niche keywords that are really high value
Right.
is very advantageous, but it's time consuming.
Right.
And so was able to massively accelerate the process of identifying our top keywords to go after. And then
Yeah. Let's pull it up.
once we had I have a process that I'd been using in Claude manually where I would basically go and research first, look at what's in the I would try to have Claude take the perspective of identify who's likely searching for this term, and then take the
Right.
perspective of that type of person, and then review the existing posts that are already there, and then use the lens um, of an SEO expert and evaluate, and going back and forth, kind of across threads. But we were able to create this content agent that very quickly is able to identify, who's this written for?
Hmm.
Is it targeting Nichols ICP? What's the expertise level? What's the ideal word count likely to be for this?
Yeah.
And go through all of these processes extremely rapidly that you would traditionally do in SEO,
Hmm.
and identify and then draft an outline. And then now, at the time, there wasn't an MCP server, but I'm able to actually connect a keyword research MCP server and go and pull
And
data.
pull
So I
those
just give it
numbers.
the
Yeah.
keyword and it's able to go from that to a very, very high quality outline.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
and
So
then we
just for
usually
the, oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
I said just for the audience to understand, you built our context foundation that we built from, but I think we started with a Notion import, right? So we started with a Notion
I think we
import.
started with a Notion import and then about 300 hours of transcripts. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So then
that's
we
right.
put that through I have a context operating system to make context operating systems, which is like so funny meta, but that gets processed basically into this graph of knowledge. And that's, here's our ICP definition. It kind of like, I think it becomes an conceptual way to have a voice of the customer that you can constantly reference back, which sounds like what you were doing in that process.
Exactly. So any article it's writing, we are trying to find opportunities where we can talk about where our product is relevant,
Hmm.
and where we can speak to our customers. And so having that context, having it have a deep understanding of the product that it was able to extract very quickly from the demo transcripts.
Yeah.
And then additionally, having context on a business that it was able to get from internal calls and then from the Notion.
Yeah.
Everything it does, it starts with that context going through the Claude MD file.
Right. So it starts to compound on itself. So once you solve that problem one time and save it back to the system, and you can push it up to Git and then reuse it infinitely, or someone else in your team can use it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the ability to save processes, I mean, now it's skills, but at the time we were just using markdown
Yeah.
files.
Yeah. That's why you
Um,
have it as that markdown file agent. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was able to, we ended up hiring a journalist who was able to write, I would say, while holding the bar for human written content, high quality, well researched, in some cases, probably better researched,
Hmm.
probably 5x faster than we did in the past.
Right. Just because you got that. That's a really cool specific example. I guess more broadly, how has it changed how you work and think about general go-to-market and strategy?
I think probably the biggest acceleration factor that there is just having the ability to use the subagents and go and look for specific language in customer conversations. And
Hmm.
so something that I previously would have needed to have listened to 10 sales calls and be taking notes. And I still do that. I love to engage with our customers as much as I can.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we were considering, we were planning on kind of doing some repositioning. We were adding some new products. And I really wanted to I was actually talking to some of the top rebrand agencies and ended up looking at what the processes that they used were. And a lot of it was customer conversations. And so I ended up
Yeah.
actually sending Claude off to first create a markdown file agent that after doing deep research, trying to read as much context as it could on, and even pulling YouTube transcripts, things like that, on how
How to
people
think about it.
typically think about this and
Hmm.
this problem of kind of positioning and branding, and um, and then had it actually run through that process. Basically, because it has so much context, it's almost as if it's able to talk to customers for you because you have just so much. If you ask Claude, something that I often, if I'm talking to a new company doing some kind of a consult, I'll say, take the role of one of their customers, then I'll basically interview it.
Yeah.
But it's generally going to be the most middle of the road, not, it
Generic.
works,
Yeah.
but it's a very generic
Right. Because I don't have the
persona.
context. Quite literally doesn't have the
Exactly. It
context.
doesn't
Yeah.
have the context, right? And so, whereas when we actually, when I ran a process, for example, when we were building out, we were going to be going to the KBIS conference, Kitchen and Bath and
Hmm.
International Builder
Remember
Show
that.
down in Florida.
Yeah.
And we needed to spin up a booth design. And I just trying to get an understanding of what would resonate with our customers and at scale, what were the aha moments in calls. And so I
Right.
literally had basically spun up a process. I was like, let me think of what all the triggers I would want it to do. And so it's, in the past you could do keyword research, but now it can do concept research. Actually read through these transcripts and look for the moments of excitement, look for
Right.
the moments of high emotion specifically, and
Right.
then
That's a good way
compile
to
that
frame it.
into exactly, and then pile
Yeah.
that into a document where I had, I think, around 600 quotes, and they were all wiki linked. And so then that was just
Yeah.
gold to have that condensed down. Now I can
Right.
spend 2 hours reading through that, and then use that to spin up and start ideating on what kind of messaging we wanted to use on our conference booth.
Nice.
I think then, like, another really concrete example is product marketing pages. I increasingly, as we've scaled, haven't had the time to talk to customers. And so there'll often be little aspects of the product that they love or little friction points with competitors that I'm not aware of because I'm not in those calls day to day.
Hmm.
But to be able to have it go through the whole corpus of data and look, what are the most frequently complained about X, competitor, or what
competitor or
are the
whatever. Right.
exactly is absolute gold.
Nice. Nice.
So I can show you, for example, when we were working on our recurrence page, recurring payments page, I had to go through transcripts and identify the top pain points. And one of the things that hadn't occurred to me is that many of the competitors require micro deposits,
Oh, I see.
and we do not. And that's something that comes up in demo calls, but me not being as close to the product at this point takes that very for granted that you can set those up with just
That's a
any kind
big
of a routing
difference.
number on
Yeah.
nickel.
Yeah. So just for everyone to get the context, you pointed Claude at the whole transcript, corpus that's constantly being updated on GitHub. We can show them that in a second and say, go find me all of the pain points that I can't see. So basically extended your insight conversation start having, and then kind of compressed it to that one document with verification all the way back because of those wiki links, right?
Exactly. So basically I had it when I'm yeah, and then you can see on the final page, I don't actually find that Claude in general is that good at I don't like Claude's output for final copywriting
The
as much as
generic
I've tried to
copy.
prompt
Yeah.
it. Well, it does an okay job, but I usually end up tweaking things a bit because it has just these AI isms. But
Yeah.
sure enough, we're emphasizing some of the very
Oh, got
specific
in there.
things that I
Nice.
identified. And it really helps. I think, you can always, if you have enough volume, you can A/B test what converts, obviously. But to be able to have, at scale, the ability to look through all of these transcripts and then see how often are features mentioned and what's the language, and then make those, get a pretty good idea in advance of what's really advantage for me when I'm playing the role of a product.
So it seems like the customer voice part has been super powerful. What other examples are there of using a system like this?
Yeah, I think understanding the specific language people use is extremely helpful in copywriting, because it's often not the language that a fintech company uses.
Right.
And fortunately, I grew up in the Midwest. I've worked construction, I've worked farming some, and so I think I have a better idea of who our persona is, than I would otherwise. But still,
Right.
having that exact language, it gives Claude really deep context. So when, for example, as an early stage company, I think one of the big opportunities we have is to try to find really high alpha opportunities where maybe they don't scale that well, but we can get an outsized return. And so
Right.
I kind of view our go-to-market a little bit like a hedge fund, where we're making a series of we do our meat and potatoes marketing, but then we are always often trying to experiment with little bets to see,
Right.
is this what channels might work really, really well for us. And if I talk to Claude, and ask it, help me come up with a go-to-market strategy for nickel, it's going to give me the most generic, bland advice.
Right.
But given the context, if I, especially, I think a big part of how my thinking has shifted is, I'm now in these conversations trying to think about the entire context I'm putting into the thread. And it's usually, sometimes I use it for ideation, but I would say more often than not, I'm testing my ideas and my hypothesis.
And using it as like back pressure to push against it.
Well, and I think it with the detailed transcripts that are in there, it's able to take the role of a persona, and then you can test how something might resonate. Or,
Yep.
for example, one of the channels that we've been, I think for us being a fintech platform that does large payments up to $1 million, trust is a huge thing.
That
And
makes sense.
so,
Yeah.
one of the things that we've been experimenting with is doing connected TV, and additionally radio.
All right. Let me tell about
And
this.
if you were to ask Claude, should a fintech company at Series A be doing radio? It would generally say absolutely no,
No
right?
way.
That's
Yeah.
no standard predictable revenue playbook.
Right.
But what we're finding is that there's really strong trust signals in some of these traditional channels
Right. For your
right
ICP, that makes
now.
sense.
Yeah, and I think also everybody is so oriented around attribution. And
Hmm.
obviously, who doesn't want attribution? But in some ways, if you view marketing as an arbitrage opportunity to try to find the best value, I think often those channels that have the cleanest attribution are the most flooded ones. And
Yep.
so it's given us the confidence to be able to dive in and test some channels and really get some good results that we otherwise might not have, just because I think we have a far deeper understanding of our customer than we
Oh,
would without this system.
I haven't thought about that one. That makes sense. So you're using the contextual depth and being able to like really have an active voice of the customer and just some like far deeper insight all the way down to like the really granular details that there's just not enough time in the day to go do manually, even if you could do it like as your full-time job. Like using that insight as a competitive edge to go find opportunities other people are not pricing properly.
Exactly. I mean, I would love it if I could talk to customers. I think talking to customers as much as you can is a huge hack
Yeah.
for anybody in growth. But with limited time, I do talk to customers, but then this just gives me the leverage to be able to. And why don't you go, if I could have an assistant, which is essentially what I'm doing, go read every transcript and try and find, all the
The
mentions of
edges. Yeah,
excitement or
exactly.
voice or any mentions of what, what their day-to-day operations look like or things like that.
Yeah.
And it's able to do
Yeah.
it.
That makes sense. That also makes sense why it was such a high priority to get live transcripts just constantly being pushed into the system. That was one of the first automations. So after we built the core context OS for Casper, we then focused on the automations. So I think it was the tickets and then the transcripts are the first two things I built up the automations on.
Yeah, I think we did the transcripts and then we did support tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of the things that I was really excited to try was uh, we have a chatbot on the website that's powered by HubSpot. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that HubSpot runs that normally is you basically scrape your entire website and you can hide certain files if you want, and then you can put in a source file, and then you can do these short answer questions or kind of try and tune it and correct it.
For the
And we were
support bot.
finding
Yeah.
it actually does a remarkably good job, but there's sometimes honestly probably gaps in our content. There's
Mm-hmm.
times when it just goes off the rails, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you've seen, the people saying if you don't want to pay for Claude Code, just go to the McDonald's chatbot, right? Like because a lot of these
It's all
systems are
running
set up
Claude.
without,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and they're not really set, and you can ask it to do math for you or whatever, and it will.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it doesn't really have any guardrails, and so. Because we had been doing human responses in intercom,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to load those tickets in bulk. And then basically from those thousands of tickets, it has a really deep understanding of both our product and questions about pricing, all of these sorts of things. And so I basically set up an agent that was able to run the process of, read 10 support tickets and write a document that you would need, the minimum amount of information you would need to answer these tickets. And
Yeah.
then test itself against those tickets. Could you answer these? Basically take the role
Nice.
of you're now a chatbot. This is the only context you have. Can you answer these questions?
And run it through a loop.
and
Yeah.
and run it through a loop. And I think I went through less than 100 support tickets, and it was hitting an accuracy bar where it was either dismissing the ticket or transferring to a human when it should
Mm-hmm.
acceptably, or
Yeah.
had the correct guardrails. And so now we have one revision controlled source of truth that powers that chatbot, and it's been far more effective rather than kind of the hodgepodge of short answers and random website
Scattered
pages and things.
context. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. So just showing like the automation we built out for this. You see here, like update 20 minutes ago, 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago. These are live calls processed in from Gone. We're doing the same thing for the tickets from Fin and HubSpot. So all these are pushed into the GitHub. So this is our living source of truth for the system. if you go look at like one of these right here, um, the system, the agents are using Cloudflare, right? It's my favorite platform to build anything on nowadays. It'll go push in and use a like kind of like a schema. We've decided like this is what we want to know about every single one of these calls. So this is what enables you to go say, hey, like, what are our top 5 pain points for the last month of calls? And it'll go, all right, they just go, he knows to look for pain points, and then he can go pull that into the context. And it's just dramatically more efficient and effective, I think. Any other a little bit about using a system like this, there's some shifts in thinking, kind of understanding limitations and use cases. I guess, can you just tell me about how you've had to kind of adapt, both you and your team, adapt your thinking to use a system like this effectively?
Yeah, we ended up, I like using either Claude Code in Terminal, or I use Cursor for
Mm-hmm.
navigation, and then use the Code plugin quite a bit as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that for kind of a power user on the team, there's nothing better than actually being in there with the data and being able to look at the files and edit things. I would say a huge unlock for me has been Whisperflow.
Mm.
I am somebody that has never been a great speller, and probably if I hadn't been homeschooled would have had an ADHD diagnosis, and definitely struggle with focus. And so it's much easier for me to talk things out. And so
Just
that's
like
been a
stream of
huge
consciousness.
unlock.
Yeah,
And I
that
can
makes
talk at
sense.
170 words per, according to Whisperflow, I'm in the 98th percentile for word.
There you go. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
a higher
for
input. It's
speed.
higher input. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say use Whisperflow. I think a second thing is we ended up kind of going with a tiered usage structure.
Mm-hmm.
We have now, I think a lot of people are using it through the MCP server and Claude desktop. So
Yep.
they can go and ask questions to both. You set one up. We have one to HubSpot, and then one to Casper
Yep.
to the
Yeah, we
unstructured
talked
data.
about
And
that
now
a
we have
bit.
one to Snowflake that kind of takes the role of a data scientist.
Nice.
Um, and that, but then we also have for really quick queries, the ability to ask questions in Slack,
Mm-hmm.
which has been really effective. So anybody new joining the team can now jump in that channel and ask questions and get
Yeah.
answers very quickly.
Yeah, that was cool when you told me about that. That wasn't even one of the use cases I originally thought of before. I mean, obviously we focused at marketing and sales and everything like that. But you saying, yeah, guys had somebody use it to onboard. I was like, oh, didn't even think that was like possible. You look at it, it's like it totally makes sense because it's the same context, just pointed at a different problem. What does
Yeah,
nickel do, right? It's just external, external. You flip it around, it's just as useful.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges though is it's still, no matter how much you try to enforce things with your
Mm-hmm.
Claude MD file, there's still certain you have to have a certain level of AI literacy to know,
Yep.
you can't go into especially our pool of unstructured data and then ask it a question like, can you tell me how many customers we have in XYZ state?
Yeah.
Because it will give you some customers.
It'll make something up. Yeah.
It will,
Yeah.
and it may be accurate, it may not, but it's not designed to do that, and it doesn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Because for that one, you could say it's like, oh, well, it's going to go search all the transcripts, and it says, look, I found customer transcripts, so it's going to start counting transcripts one by one instead of going into the HubSpot connection and actually like pulling that data. Yeah.
Yeah, it's have you seen this YouTuber Husk some I forget,
Mm-mm.
Husk something? He's the one that actually Sam Altman. Somebody asked him in an interview because he makes basically videos where he talks to AI, which is ChatGPT on his phone, and
Yeah.
he'll ask questions like, I'm going to run a mile, and can you time me? And he'll be like, oh
Oh,
yes,
is
I'll
that
time
the wait, is
you.
that the guy that holds the phone like this?
Yeah, he
Whatever.
has the
Yeah,
most
yeah.
like
Those are really
deadpan
funny.
delivery.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, those are
yeah,
funny.
exactly. And it does it, and it's like always can, never knows what it doesn't know, never knows what its limitations are. And so,
Exactly.
actually, my friend Christine Spang, who's the founder of Nihilus, had this book on her table that was called How to AI, and it's kind of, I think it's a very general knowledge book
Yeah.
on AI, and kind of meant for a wider audience. I was surprised that there were books on AI and that she was reading one, but they have there's 24 laws of AI, and I think the first one is that never trust it.
Never trust
Always
it. Yeah.
verify,
That's
right?
cool. I mean, I
And I
totally agree
think,
based on my experience. Yeah.
yeah,
Building systems
exactly.
out.
I think that like even just exposing, having some basic training on your team of
Hmm.
what the limitations are, when it's likely to hallucinate, what the actual data sources are is really, really important because it definitely can create confusion. And the other funny thing about Claude is it's very hyperbolic. And so anytime, you ask
Yeah.
it a question about a business problem or something like that, if it sees any sign that something might be wrong, it'll be like, this is an
Goes
utter
nuclear.
disaster,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and in many cases there's nothing actually wrong at all, but it saw one
Mhm.
transcript where somebody's upset about X, Y, or Z, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's
It's
like,
just
we
like the
have a
world's on
huge
fire.
problem with churn,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the
Yeah.
that's a good like a general principle. Like these systems are super valuable, but they do take maintenance. They take work to maintain. And like if they're not being updated, right, they're gonna get old, or the agent's gonna go and say like, oh well, it's just it's gonna drift. It's actually the term I use, like context drift. The more times that kind of like copy something, kind of degrades. Same thing with like using AI, like a copy of a copy of a copy. It's going to be so degraded at certain points, completely off base.
It also, there are times when it just surprises me with how, despite having done a lot of work on our system, I I was reading about the Anthropic team. I forget the growth marketer name is name there, but
Hmm.
constantly trying to see what new servers I can connect up and what APIs I can connect up. And so I
Yep.
connected up our Google Ads. And the first thing it told me to do was when I had it audit our account was to uh, make all of the competitor alternative keywords, which are some of our top performing keywords, because obviously it's
Okay.
people interested in
Yeah.
migrating off of that competitor.
Yep. Makes sense.
It was like these are informational keywords.
You're right about that.
It's
Yeah.
like,
But
and
it's like a common sense thing. And AI has no common sense because it has no sense, right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but its ability to pull data and then look at the large amount of data in our Google Ads account and then make recommendations. But you definitely have to have that human. I would not. It is in no way ready to be unleashed to actually make calls on the account. At least the way that ours
Just
is
fully autonomously.
performing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes it can make these really make or break errors. Most of the time, it's like, oh, that's a really good recommendation, and then there's this 20% of the time where it's just completely off the rails.
Yeah. So I guess a good way to think of it is it increases like your highest cap, both like for accuracy and speed. But there's also just like it kind of opens up the bottom as well, depending on how much if you give it no context or not guiding it into like pointing it the right direction, it'll just like make these like ridiculous errors that would no so a human being without context wouldn't make that problem, make that mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's leverage.
Yeah,
You
that's the perfect
have
way to think about it.
is your company still called you changed it to Taste Matter, didn't
That's
you?
yes, but technically my company name is Digital Leverage, like the legal name. Partially because
Yeah,
I think of it
exactly.
as leverage, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that increasingly I'll go through these phases where there's always friction when I'm connecting up a new system or like for example, I knew there was a Google Ads MCP server, but a you have to create a manager account and then connect
Mm.
all the little
Yeah,
technical stuff to
all the
get
stuff like
it
that. Yeah.
live. But finally get around to doing it. And there's so many points where all of a sudden like once you set up this system, there's a little bit of friction. And then you have this moment of, wow, I just did 10 hours of work in 30
10 minutes or
minutes.
whatever.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
the next day, it's just like feels it's amazing how quickly you get used to
You
the
get
amount of
used to it, you take it for
leverage you
granted.
have in that
Yeah,
process. And then the
yeah.
only time that I will realize that I'll be working with someone and they're doing things the way I was doing it last year, and I'll be like, wow,
You see the difference,
there's
right?
so much
Yeah,
faster. It's kind of just a whirlwind experience.
totally.
I think one of the other things that really uh, we've tried to do internally is hold everybody to the bar of all the output needs to have an owner.
Yeah.
And if you're going to show me, a plan or a strategy or a report that you made, even if you used AI to generate it, it's
That's your
yours
report.
and you're held
Yeah.
accountable for it. Because
Yeah.
I think
That
one of
totally
the
makes
things that
sense.
I'm seeing, and it's really easy to fall into, is you can generate slop
Yeah.
that, and like let other people review it and trust the output. But I think that's a good internal bar to hold, is basically first, make sure everyone on the team understands, probably tier access to it. So people have different
Mm-hmm.
levels of access depending on their
Their
technical
love those
capabilities.
skills. Yeah, makes sense.
To get everybody to have a basic level of AI literacy about what works, what doesn't, what data sources are there, when it's likely to hallucinate, what the best practices are. And then three, holding people accountable to, anything you generate with this is your work.
Yeah.
And Claude, I think this is part of where we've talked about AI LARPing.
Yeah.
I see these LinkedIn posts where people are talking about how my agent,
My
whatever
agent
this
works for
name,
12 hours overnight for me, and I have 5,000 agents running at all times. Yeah. That's like stuff like that.
yeah. And to be
Or they're
honest,
measuring, or go ahead.
yeah, well, it can be extremely powerful, but I still think that the best outputs generally come with a human in the loop and a lot of
Yeah.
tuning.
Yeah. The thing I was gonna say, it's like you don't measure the activity, like measure the end output. If
Exactly.
it's faster for you, if it's faster for you, just like I need to write 2 sentences of copy by hand. I already know I'm gonna write. You don't need AI, you don't need to like insert AI into that process. It's like it's the difference I think between like we need to really evaluate this side of technology, figure out where it fits that like process, and then like okay, the wisdom of like this process does not need to be automated or shouldn't be automated.
Yeah, exactly.
And like figuring out what that is. I like that approach of like always holding someone to like this is your output and the tiered access. Because more often like I see people like it's like an 80-20 split. 20% of people need to be actively in the system working on it in the depths of it. And then like 80% of people are just gonna be like, I want to get my transcripts in a way that's like easy for me to read or get like high throughput access to HubSpot through like that custom CPU server. Like stuff like that will just like a quality of life improvement for them and they don't have to think about the overhead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I think in the growth marketing role, I just have so many different use cases that are extremely powerful, but in other roles, it's especially if it's not implemented well,
Mm-hmm.
people don't need the same level of access. I think in growth marketing, I'm constantly just, it's like there's so many use cases where every API. I saw that Jason Lemkin from SaaStr just was released a new tool that basically evaluates, and this is how I'm looking at software now as well. How accessible is it to an agent?
How to get
Uh,
into it? Yeah, totally.
yeah,
It's going in that
exactly.
direction. Yeah,
Yeah,
agent first. That's
but
cool.
that's definitely not the case for all roles.
No, by far not. So maybe that's a good segue to getting into some of the systems we built. To get, so it's a good segue to kind of move into the applications we built on top of that context foundation. We mind kind of setting up the context around. It's funny. I feel like I say context like every other word nowadays. Giving the background on like the kind of dynamic lead scoring system we built out and like why that was a big pain point for you.
Yeah, one of the really fun things about working with Nickel has been just we've been growing really fast, and so uh, with that, there's been a lot of challenges that come when you have large influx of leads, and so the ability to triage and identify the highest quality, highest intent signups
Mm-hmm.
was something that I had done some work using Clay originally,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we wanted to have more context in there and wanted to be able to have a more customized system. And so I kind of proposed to you, what if we could kind of create something that took the role of sort of basically a VP of sales and was able to look through the entire HubSpot record, and understand what's the context, what conversations have happened, um, even do things like if need be, go scrape the website,
Mm-hmm.
have an understanding of, the other data, some of it that we pre-processed and brought in. And then, rather than having an automated score where you're adding points or removing points for specific
Like a
things.
rubric, yeah.
We actually are allowing the LLM to, I think you basically originally had something that was a little bit more of a rubric and then found that it actually worked better to just tell it, take this role
Yep.
and run with it.
The
And
I can speak more to that how that worked in a second. But just to finish your kind of like the context you were talking about.
yeah, and then I think one of the things that's been really interesting is it's so easy to spin up a dashboard now that
Yeah.
even though in the end we mostly are using the data in HubSpot, we were able to spin up a beautiful dashboard that we can go spot check records and customize it however we want and look and it was really great, especially for the prototyping phase when we were dialing in the prompts.
Yeah. So that the 2 points on that is like I think actually seeing it as like a card on a UI or whatever the right modality is just makes it far more tangible. Because one of the things I think that is now a real problem using AI is like there's so much information that is you have less visibility. You're doing
Yeah.
more work, so you just can't see as far into the system. So seeing it actually teed up here, we'll show it right now. We have to blur like 90% of it because it is like such well, it's like customer information we can't show and specifics, but like just to give you an idea of like what it looks like. That's meant to be like these are the priority leads that we determined should be checked right now, basically. Because there's if you have too many leads, you have to really triage it. Going kind of working through the technical side of it. Um, Ivan and I sat down for a really long time and described like his intuitive process is how he would go into HubSpot, click around himself, look at their um, basically like their firmographics and some specific details that Michael cares about for qualifying these leads. And then we put them to a prompt and just ran it through a ton of iterations. So first starting with that like static rubric, and then over time, as you kind of hone it in, you could pull away the guardrails. And one of the big core innovations was actually a tool called Code Mode, which so all this whole thing is built on Cloudflare. Cloudflare's Code Mode MCP. The core innovation is like rather than giving it like a go get contact information or go get account name, right? These like arbitrary tools, like language models are by and large mostly trained, not mostly trained on an insane amount of code to just like have them write code. So the end outcome of that is they can kind of mimic that intuitive process of I'm going to go check this page and that data point and like go this like recursive look through following the process you've described in the prompt. So it'll go make 15, calls back and forth and eventually come up with a very tuned in diagnosis that incorporates um, everything from like their firmographics to time, like how timely is this, and like kind of dynamically push them up and down based off of that prompt. Does that sound pretty much right to how we built this thing out?
Yeah, no, exactly.
So now we're going to show the custom HubSpot MCP server I built. It uses something called code mode, which we can talk more about the technical details later. The specifics of I guess, how it's specifically create values, it really melts these data and context silos by having that LLM just work back and forth recursively against the HubSpot API, and it knows the contours of your data, all the custom fields, where everything sits, and how to put it all together and do a coherent kind of narrative. So, Ivan, I know you and the team have been using this one like far more than I expected, which I'm really happy to see.
Yeah, no, I think obviously I do a lot actually looking at the full file system, but now almost everyone on our team is using the MCP servers as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great things about working with you has been like our engineering team obviously could build a lot of these things, but one, there's bandwidth constraint, and two, they don't have the same go-to-market background that you do. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think you've brought in a playbook that's allowed us to implement and build. And also now increasingly I'm able to build a lot of these things and am building a lot
Yeah,
of internal
definitely.
tools, but you're able to bring that capacity to do it very quickly. And like you said, you even have your own context architecture, repo, context architecture.
I know,
But yeah, I
right?
can,
How many times can I say context?
yeah, but anyone on the team can do something like, for example, I'll use Whisperflow. Can you tell me about the latest leads that came in from radio? Also, tell me a little bit about their lead scores and identify the highest value ones.
So you just dump it right in. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is great because a lot of people have questions. One of the really fun things about working with this team is because we're growing and we're experimenting, everybody's been, Ray and Claudio have been, yeah, very willing, much more willing than a lot of founders to try some interesting experiments, which has been really, really
Nice.
fun.
Yeah.
And so, but everyone wants to see the results. And not everyone has access to HubSpot, or if they do, they don't know how to use it. But to be able to
Yep. The data
have
maze.
exactly, to be able to have it in HubSpot or in Claude Desktop and just be able to query with natural language questions anything you want like this and have it pull
Yep.
up. And then even the generative UI as well.
Yep.
So I find myself not actually going into HubSpot for this data most of the time.
That's so funny. Yeah. So as you're pulling that up, I think I'll just call it. You saw when it was running the actual query, it was running a search and execute. Those are the two tools. The two tools it actually has. They're both sandbox code. So language models are really, really, really good at writing code instead of giving them this like arbitrary tool set to let them write code, and it gets like a 91% context reduction. So you get more insight faster for less context is the big innovation there. And thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone who's watching, everyone, thank you much for taking the time to sit down with Ivan and I. I hope this was useful in some way. You should definitely go follow him on LinkedIn. I heard he's been putting out some more content soon. Fingers crossed. I'm trying to convince him. So I'll put his contact, I'll put Nicole's website in the description. Yeah, I guess the YouTube video. But yeah, Ivan, thank you much for joining me. Is there any parting thoughts?
No, yeah, definitely feel free to connect with me. I'm always interested to talk to other people that are exploring different use cases of AI and go to market. So
Yep.
thanks for the opportunity, Jake. It's been super fun working with you.